Welcome to another episode of the Commodore 64 Compilation Comparison, and in this video I'm going to be taking a look at Dizzy's Excellent Adventures. Now this compilation was actually donated to me by my good friend Gordon Sinclair, aka Sir Clive. Some of you watching this might know him, and he donated this to me in January of this year, and I finally got around to playing it, so thank you very much Gordon for this. And obviously this is a compilation of 5 games. It was published by Codemasters. It was released in 1991 or possibly early 92. It says 91 on the packaging, but the reviews come from 1992. And yeah, 5 games, 3 of which are, at the point this was released, exclusive to the compilation, all featuring Codemasters' famous character Dizzy, of course. Let's take a look at the compilation and see what the 5 games are like. Okay, so let's take a look at the packaging in more detail. Firstly, it should be pointed out that obviously this is a collection of budget titles, but it was released as a full price compilation. I'm not sure if I mentioned that. It had a retail price of £9.99. So yeah, you can see we've got on the front cover here the big logo, Dizzy's Excellent Adventures. 5 great games, it says in the left hand corner there, and we've got a nice image of Dizzy riding on a barrel with some crocodiles and trolls and things in the background. That is the artwork from Dizzy Down the Rapids, which is one of the 5 games on the compilation, along with Dizzy Panic, Dizzy Prince of the Yolkfolk, Spellbound Dizzy and Kwik Snax. And as you can see, there's lots of things mentioned on the front here, lots of little boxes with ratings from magazines. It says here that Dizzy Down the Rapids is a new game, Dizzy Prince of the Yolkfolk is a new game and exclusive to the pack, and also Spellbound Dizzy is a new game as well. Despite that, it also has a Crash Smash on it, so it's a new game, but it must have been released before this, or how did it get a Crash Smash? I don't know. Anyway, so on the sides of the box we've got the name of the compilation, the Codemasters logo, 5 great games plastered all over it, 5 game pack on the end there as well. And on the back we've got screenshots of each of the 5 games, although not necessarily the Commodore 64 versions. Lots of pictures of different characters from the games, including Desmond the Dragon, Rockwart the Troll, Zax the Wizard, Leroy the Crocodile, various members of the Yolkfolk, Theodore the Wizard. And yeah, so basically it's also got some information about each of the games, although not a write-up of the game, what the games are about. It's more just the typical Codemasters thing of putting all the review comments, all the superlatives about the games on them. So nicely presented packaging. Let's take a look inside. Looking inside is not going to take too long. Obviously you can see it's a box. I don't have the instructions for this one. I have seen them on eBay listings and things like that. They look pretty comprehensive. There's a pretty good write-up of each of the 5 games, how to play them, the controls, hints and things like that. But I don't have the instructions, so I can't really comment much further. What I do have is the 3 cassettes. Yeah, surprisingly this has come on 3 cassettes. So as you can see, they're printed with Dizzy's Excellent Adventures and the name of the game, so unique to this compilation in that respect. So you've got Prince of the Yolkfolk and Spellbound on the first one, you've got Kwik Snax on that side and Panic Dizzy on the other, and then the third one has got Dizzy Down the Rapids on one side and, well, it's blank on the other. So bit surprising that. I would have thought they'd probably just put Kwik Snax and Panic Dizzy, for example, on one side and Dizzy Down the Rapids on the other side of one tape and just had 2 cassettes in the box. But no, you get 3. So I'm kind of tempted to load that side up and see what's on it, because maybe it's completely empty, or who knows what's on there. Maybe it's another copy of the same game. I'm not going to do that though. What I'm going to do instead is get on and take a look at this compilation in more detail, starting with a magazine advert. So here we have a magazine advert for the game. This is taken from the pages of Crash, although I suspect since this was a cross-platform release, it also appeared in other magazines. The main artwork comes from Dizzy Down the Rapids, and above it you can see the title Dizzy's Excellent Adventures, and also the fact that it's a 5 game pack. There's a yellow flash on the right hand side that says it's available on the Spectrum, C64 and Amstrad, and the retail price is confirmed there at £9.99. You can then see some individual artwork for the 5 games included on the compilation, with a screenshot of each below those. There's also a small amount of text beneath each piece of artwork, which in typical Codemasters style usually has some superlative about the game taken from a magazine. It was actually quite rare for Codemasters to advertise in magazines at this point in time, since most of the releases were budget-priced impulse purchases, so advertising wasn't really required. Consequently, it's actually quite nice to see that they put the effort in to advertise this compilation, and it's a pretty decent ad too. Let's now take a look at the 5 games that make up this compilation, and first up we have Dizzy Panic, or Panic Dizzy as it's known in-game. This was originally released by Codemasters in 1991. In this action puzzle game, Grand Dizzy needs help testing his toy making machine, and Dizzy and his friends have agreed to help. Dizzy must move a conveyor belt left and right so that falling shapes pass through the appropriately shaped holes in the belt. When 4 or more matching shapes pass through the belt at once, a toy is created. The tubes that dispense the shapes move slowly down the screen, but can be paused for a short moment when the correct shape is matched. If an incorrect shape is matched, then the tubes descend more quickly, and when the tubes reach the bottom, it's game over. The only way to push the chutes back up is to drop 3 or more shapes together. The game consists of 20 levels, with a number of different shapes and the speed increasing as the levels progress. The first thing that's nice to see about this game is that it's not a lazy direct port of the Spectrum version. It has a good title screen with a bouncy SID tune, and then once you start the game you can see that the majority of the graphics have been done specifically for the C64, and there's another great tune accompanying the action. This is conceptually a decent idea for an action puzzle game, but it has some issues. According to the instructions, you're supposed to be able to halt the descent of the chutes that drop the pieces by dropping multiple pieces through the gaps at once. However, on early levels, 2 pieces never line up, and dropping them through when they're not lined up makes no difference. The height of the chutes doesn't reset between levels, so you get an inevitable and seemingly unavoidable game over by the third one. The first 2 levels were also quite boring, as the same shapes seem to repeatedly come from the same tubes, so you rarely need to do anything other than hit the fire button to speed them up to drop through the relevant gaps. However, after playing one game you can then choose the starting level for subsequent ones, and from level 3 onwards you can drop 3 objects at once, which does push the chutes back up, and eventually quadruples, which reveal a toy at the bottom of the screen. This does open the game up to be played properly, though to be honest it's still quite dull doing the same thing over and over. The presentation of the game is good, and as I said, it's not a bad concept, but it's essentially broken for the first 2 levels, and is not especially fun even when you can play it properly. It needed something to give it more variety, as watching 50 or more shapes drop through holes in the bottom of the screen on each level isn't enough to make you want to play it more than a couple of times. Next up is Dizzy Down the Rapids, a game that debuted on this compilation, although it was released as a standalone title later in 1992. Dizzy and Daisy were out in the enchanted forest picking blueberries for a pie they were making for a dinner party. Before they knew it, the 2 eggs had wandered far into the forest, and by the time they reached the banks of the Great Torrent River, the 2 knew they'd become hopelessly lost. Suddenly they heard a twig snap, and Dizzy span around to be confronted by Rockwart the Troll and a gang of ferocious-looking hench trolls. As Rockwart threatened them, Dizzy grabbed Daisy's hand and the pair ran desperately towards the river. The trolls moved in ever closer, but Dizzy had a plan. "Jump in here, Daisy," he cried as he somersaulted towards an abandoned apple barrel, but the biggest challenge was still ahead of them. The game sees Dizzy and Daisy in the 2-player mode, riding on barrels down a river full of waterfalls and avoiding obstacles and enemies at the same time. I reckon this is one of the best looking Codemasters budget games on the C64, with some lovely colourful and well animated graphics and smooth scrolling. There's some clever shadow effects in use under the bridges and other overhead objects that give a feeling of 3D depth to the environment as you make your way under them. Sound wise it's less impressive though, as while there is a nice tune on the title screen, there's no music in game and the effects are sparse and uninspired. The game is obviously inspired by the Atari coin-op tubing, but the controls are simple directional ones, you just push the way you want to go. There are all kinds of obstacles to avoid and lots of enemies to dodge or kill. You start with 25 apples to throw at the enemies, but they can't be replenished until you lose a life, despite there being an apple power-up. With some enemies requiring multiple shots to destroy, progress is best made by dodging them when possible, and saving your shots for the enemies that block your path or yield a collectible. On that note, enemies that drop power-ups flash and make a tinkling sound. Power-ups include shields, but most collectibles just seem to be a score boost. There is a timer, and the game is over if it runs out, so you need to move quite fast. I assume there are levels, given that there's a limited amount of time available, but I never got far enough to complete the first one. The most annoying aspect of the game is when you're propelled down the screen on some rapids straight into a previously off-screen enemy, or a projectile hits you as you scroll the screen down. This isn't great game design, but is something you'll get wise to the more times you replay the game. There's also some inertia to your character's movement that you'll have to get to grips with. Overall, this is a polished if slightly dull and repetitive game, but I think perseverance would reap rewards and it's probably a lot more fun in the simultaneous 2-player mode. For a budget offering, it's perfectly acceptable. After 2 action games, the next 2 games on this compilation are more typical Dizzy adventures, and the first of those is Dizzy Prince of the Yolkfolk, which was exclusive to this compilation at the time it was released, though it was released standalone later in 1992. The story for this one is that Grand Dizzy was feeling very down one day, so Dizzy and Daisy decided to cheer him up by baking him his favourite food, cherry pie. Daisy went to get some cherries from her cupboard but found there were none to be seen. They'd been eaten by Pogie the Fluffle, who darted off into the enchanted forest to escape Daisy's rage. Dizzy and Daisy decided to go into the forest to catch Pogie and gather more cherries at the same time. Whilst searching for Pogie, they got lost and found a castle, where they thought they would find help, but it seemed deserted. They looked in the castle for Pogie, but Daisy caught herself on a mystic spinning wheel. She started feeling really tired, so she found a bed and went to sleep. Before Dizzy could wake her, Rockwart the Troll caught him and locked him up underground. You start the game in prison with 3 lives, a full health bar, and can carry up to 3 items in your inventory. The main objective of the game is to become a prince, find Daisy and wake her from her 100-year slumber. There are also 20 cherries to collect in order to fully finish the game, which also replenish your health. Unlike the first 2 games in this collection, this looks like a standard Spectrum port with the trademark monochrome graphics. The animation is good though, and the trees on the edges of the screen are nicely drawn. The environment looks good, though many attributes seem to have been reused from earlier games in the series. It would of course look better on the Speccy with its more vibrant colour scheme and higher resolution. One thing that definitely isn't ported from the Spectrum is the background tune, which is a decent bouncy fantasy SID composition that does inevitably get annoying after a while. The music can be switched off, but there are no sound effects. When the game starts, you get a nice easy puzzle to solve to get you going, but it does become tedious having to redo it every time you restart the game. That will happen a lot because this has the same issues that the majority of the Dizzy games have. That means annoying trial and error gameplay with lots of places where you'll die, and you only have a few lives. You do get energy as well as lives, which can be replenished by collecting the cherries, so it's not as bad as some games of this type, but there are areas where you'll die without any warning. The first of these you're likely to encounter is when crossing the river on the boat. The first issue is that you have to move with the boat, it doesn't automatically carry you when you jump on it. Worse than that though, you have to jump right as soon as you enter the screen with the ferryman, as the boat stops dead with no time to react and you'll drown if you don't. This is impossible to predict and is hard to do even when you know it's coming. You've also got the usual issue of Dizzy stupidly jump rolling all over the place and can spend ages throwing yourself around trying to get to higher platforms in some areas. Eventually you'll work out where to stand to get those jumps right, but it's still really annoying. It is satisfying to solve a puzzle and make a little progress, but you'll then be faced with a new one that you probably need to backtrack to get the right item for, as your inventory is so small. Ultimately, this has the same flaws as all the other core Dizzy games in the series. Why make it so hard to control and easy to die, when the object of the game is exploration and puzzle solving? I guess the idea is to give the game longevity, but it just becomes frustrating having to replay the earlier stages over and over, just to get a little further into it. It's that time again where I say thank you to all my channel members, whose names you can see here in my Supporters Hall of Fame. If you're enjoying this video and would like to join these fine folks and support my efforts, why not become a member yourself? For a monthly fee starting from just 99p, you can get access to the special membership perks shown on screen, and more besides. If you're interested, then please click on the join button below this video for more information. If you're not able to commit to a monthly contribution but would still like to support my channel, then you could also give a super thanks. This one-off donation gives you a highlighted comment on whichever video you choose to click the button on, and anyone doing this will also get a shout out from me on a subsequent video. The super thanks button can be found below every video I produce. You can also help raise the profile of this channel by liking this video and leaving a comment, which helps improve my ranking in the mysterious YouTube algorithm. Any support you can give, financial or otherwise, is greatly appreciated. The penultimate game on the compilation is Spellbound Dizzy. This was also billed as being a new game on this compilation, as well as being the biggest and best Dizzy game yet with over 100 screens. Dizzy had been visiting his local friendly wizard, Theo. Theo had left his book of really powerful spells lying around in his laboratory, left open at the page headed a really powerful spell that shouldn't be read out loud. Whether Dizzy actually read the heading is not known, but he said the spell and it's caused a catastrophe. Dizzy has spirited all his Yolkfolk chums and wizard Theo into the underworld. There's only one course of action open to the brave little hero. Read the spell again and spirit himself into the underworld to save his rotund group of pals. Dizzy must search the underworld to find rotating stars and a special object to release each of the Yolkfolk. When he's found these items, he must take them to Theo, who will cast a spell to send his friends back home. I was expecting to have to repeat everything I just said about the previous game, but actually I found this one to be a lot more enjoyable. The first thing to mention though is that the game seems to have no option for joystick control, it's keyboard only. There's probably a cracked version that fixes that, but that would certainly be a negative point for most C64 gamers. The usual Spectrum ported graphics are present, but there's much more colour variation in this game and more vibrant locations, as well as a lovely screen border. Dizzy looks great with red used for his boots and gloves and is animated well. There's also a great SID soundtrack in this game, though again there are no sound effects. There are a couple of visual issues though. The screen annoyingly blanks for a second when many actions are taken, but worse than that is the crass in-game advertising for other Codemasters games that is found on signs throughout this one. These are often in places where you need to use an item, meaning you read them by accident and they do get annoying. Another gripe is that the speech and information boxes are hard to read, as they overlay each other and leave the previous one behind with the text in dark blue. Just blacking out the previous one would have been better. Gameplay wise though, this is certainly more accessible than the other games, at least to begin with. The trial and error approach still exists, but there's a lot less chance of losing lives unexpectedly. The windy shaft that serves as an atrium connecting many locations is a great concept, as is the use of heavy rocks to drop back down it. You need more than 2 rocks to drop down further than one level, so need to expand your inventory capacity early on, and then be careful of where you leave items that you may need to use lower down, otherwise you're going to do a lot of backtracking. There's a good sense of progression, as you can rescue one of the Yolkfolk quite easily early on, without losing any lives if you're careful. This gives you more encouragement to persevere than some of the other games in the series. One slight niggle is that you need 2 stars to rescue each of your friends, along with a key item, but the screen doesn't tell you how many stars you've collected, so you'll need to keep count in your head. I made decent progress in the game for a while and then got stuck not being able to get further down the shaft, but I saw enough to know this is the best of the Dizzy games I've played. It's much more fair and doesn't rely on that annoying jump too much either from what I saw, so I was pleasantly surprised. The final game on the compilation is Kwik Snax, originally released in 1990. It's an arcade-style maze game set in Castle Vulture, where the aim of each level is for Dizzy to rescue all the Fluffles after they've hatched and then lead them to the exit. The Fluffles queue up walking behind you and are vulnerable to monsters that patrol the maze, spawned from a generator. If one of the monsters catches Dizzy, then a life is lost, but power-ups can be collected to help dispatch them. To begin with, the monsters are reasonably easy to avoid, but on later levels they can jump over or remove walls, breathe fireballs and kidnap the Fluffles. Each Fluffle delivered to the exit gives a bonus score, with the bonus increasing for every Fluffle delivered at the same time. After every 4 levels there's a bonus stage where Dizzy must catch Fluffles and other objects in a net above the castle moat. The Commodore 64 version of Kwik Snax caused some controversy at the time of release, as it was a completely different game to the version on all other systems, with many believing that it began life as an unrelated game that was only given the Dizzy treatment at the last minute. It clearly takes influence from a number of well-known games, most notably Flicky, but also Pac-Man and Bomberman to some extent. All of the elements of a good late 80s arcade game can be found here, from score boosting techniques and power-ups to secret stages and bonus levels. Graphically it's quite simple and some of the background colour choices are hideous, but the character sprites are appropriately cute and there's a good mix of music and sound effects. The gameplay is pretty simple too, and it's not until you're half a dozen levels in that it starts to get difficult, but as with all arcade games the challenge is to exploit the scoring mechanics to get as big a score as possible, and Kwik Snax offers plenty of ways to do that. It does have some flaws. Movement through the maze can be awkward as it's wider than your character in places, which can make it tricky to get around corners. The music can get annoying, and you can lose the weapons you chose before a level starts if you pick something else up early on. These are pretty minor niggles though, and overall this is a really fun arcade style game that I find a lot more enjoyable than most offerings that feature this character. Okay, those are the 5 games that make up Dizzy's excellent adventures, and I think it's a pretty good selection of games in terms of variety. As expected, you get a couple of classic Dizzy flick screen adventures, but you also get a couple of arcade action games and a puzzle or two, and with 3 of the games being brand new at the time the collection was released, this would have been an appealing offering for fans of the character. How does the compilation stack up as a whole though? As always, I'll round up this video by giving each game an individual score, before factoring in the packaging and value for money to determine the overall rating. First up we had Dizzy Panic, a well presented game with an appealing concept, but the execution is flawed due to being unable to stop the descent of the chutes that dispense the shapes on the first 2 stages. Add to that gameplay that is very samey and ultimately boring, and this one ends up being the worst game on the compilation. I'm going to give it 4 out of 10. Dizzy Down the Rapids is a great looking tubing clone that is pretty playable too, though the tight time limits and unavoidable enemies do make it something of a memory test if you want to make progress. The simultaneous 2-player mode would have been fun though, and there's enough here to keep you trying, so I'm going to give this a score of 6. Dizzy Prince of the Yolkfolk is one of the classic Dizzy adventures I mentioned, with all the frustration that brings. If you know these games, you know what you're getting, and if that's your bag then it's no worse than any of the others, nor any better. Personally, I don't love them, but there's plenty of game here for those that do, so I'm going to score this one 6 out of 10 too. Spellbound Dizzy is the other adventure game on the compilation, and a mildly pleasant surprise, as some of the frustrations of the other games seem to have been dialed back, making the game more accessible and consequently more enjoyable. I'm scoring this one 7 out of 10. And finally we had Kwik Snax, a game I've spoken highly of in other videos I've done, and while playing it again did reveal a few niggles I hadn't considered before, I still think it's a really enjoyable arcade action game for a budget title. I also couldn't give a fluffle whether it's the same game that all the other systems got, and I'm scoring it 8 out of 10. I'll move on to that overall compilation rating now, beginning with the packaging, and it's littered with all the usual self-congratulating hyperbole that the Codemasters was renowned for, but this is still a nicely presented big box compilation, with plenty of info about the games, 3 cassettes, and what would be a decent set of instructions if I had them. I'm going to give it a score of 8 out of 10. The average score for the 5 games comes out at 6.2, and in terms of value for money, well this is essentially a collection of budget titles, so you wouldn't expect them to be worth much more than the £2 each that the price of the compilation suggests. Having said that, only one of the 5 games is below average, and there's certainly plenty of longevity to be had from the 2 adventure games if you have the patience, so overall the value here is pretty good. I have no qualms about scoring it 8 out of 10, and that means that the overall compilation rating for Dizzy's excellent adventures comes out at 69%. Let's now move on to the press coverage for this compilation, and I found 2 reviews of the Commodore 64 version, the first of which is a full page write-up in the January 1992 edition of Zap64. The review features screenshots and plenty of information about each of the 5 games, and there's also this interesting image in the top left corner, featuring 3D models of Dizzy, Daisy and the wizard Theo from Spellbound Dizzy. Not sure if these were ever available to purchase by the public, but they're really nicely detailed and would have made great collectibles. Since there is a lot of detail given about the 5 games, a lot of which is just the story or how to play them, I'm just going to try and pick out the actual critique of them. The reviewer says Kwik Snax scored 80% in issue 67 and they honestly think it was too low. The monster sprites are delightful, the action is non-stop, and the presentation is second to none. Okay, the Dizzy sprite doesn't look much like our ovoid chum, but we'll let that pass. Great game. Can't argue with that. They say Panic Dizzy is the sort of game you either love or hate. I have to admit I found it a little tame, especially after Kwik Snax, but it's colourful, well presented and brilliantly executed. If you're into this sort of puzzler, you won't be disappointed. I have to take exception to that one due to the flaws I've already mentioned earlier. For Prince of the Yolkfolk, they say whoopee, at last a true Dizzy adventure that looks and plays just like it should. Prince of the Yolkfolk is a marvellous game, featuring the fiendishly simple problems and wonderful cutesy atmosphere we all know and love. At its best you can't go far wrong with a Dizzy game, and this is certainly Dizzy at his best. And at the bottom it goes on to say Prince of the Yolkfolk is a true masterpiece, and as it's only available on this compilation, a real incentive to buy. Well, obviously that changed later in 1992 when the game was made available separately, but at the time it definitely was an incentive to buy the compilation, and while I don't share the reviewer's love for the Dizzy adventures, as I've already said, if you like this type of game and you know what you're getting, then this is no worse than any of the others. For Spellbound Dizzy, it says Dizzy himself is prettier and better animated than in Yolkfolk, which I did point out myself, but the game as a whole isn't as well put together. The simplistic graphics and cutesy atmosphere are there, but the game is plagued by slow running speed. It takes ages to update the screen after moving to another location or picking up an object. Again, I also noted that. That review is rounded off by saying, don't get me wrong, it's not a disaster, just not as good as its box mate. As you already know, I do disagree with that as I found Spellbound Dizzy more accessible, but I do agree with those criticisms too. And finally, they say Dizzy Down the Rapids makes good use of the Commodore's graphic capabilities, What it lacks in originality, it makes up in playability, dispensing with that annoying asteroid-style rotating movement system, referring to tubing there, and instead concentrating on simplicity and fun. I can't pick much fault in those comments either, as I did also mention how good this game looked. Strangely, there's no review score given for this compilation, but there is a recommendation at the end saying Dizzy's Excellent Adventure is a superb compilation and a real bargain. One of the best packs I've seen in a long time, and anyone who misses out must be one egg short of a henhouse. Buy it. It is a bit of a shame they haven't given it a rating, as I can't compare it with mine, but I think the overall assessment of the 5 games is pretty similar to mine. The second review comes from the February 1992 edition of Commodore format. This one's also essentially a full page review, although it's spread across the bottom half of 2 adjacent pages, with another Codemasters compilation, Cartoon Collection, taking up the top half. This one's illustrated with 3 screenshots and an absolutely terrible drawing of Dizzy, saying it's a corker. Again, there's tons of info about the 5 games, but I think the easiest way to summarise this one is just to look at the power rating on the right hand side that gives some nice bullet points about each of the games. For the downers, it just says 1 average game in the pack, and that's referring to Dizzy Panic, which I totally agree with. Everything else is uppers, and it says Spellbound Dizzy is still the biggest and best of its kind, Prince of the Yolkfolk is brand spanking new, full of humour and colour, Down the Rapids is what tubing should have been, good arcade fun, Kwik Snax might be old, but it's held its position in the charts for ages, with good reason. And it then says, okay, so Panic Dizzy is a Tetris ripoff, and not a brilliant one at that, but it's still engaging enough, before going on to say a glorious collection for the thousands of Dizzy fans, and a lot for your money. They give it a rating of 91%, which is a little on the high side for my liking, but it does all come down to how much you like the Dizzy flick screen adventure games, doesn't it? Let's bring things to a close, as I always do, by taking a look at where Dizzy's Excellent Adventures has landed in my compilation league table, and taking a look first at the full price compilation rankings. That score of 69% for the compilation has landed in a pretty respectable 7th place. I wasn't expecting it to do as well as it has, to be honest. It's got the same score as Domark's Mindbenders compilation in 6th place, but despite the Dizzy collection having one more game in it, I think Mindbenders has to rank a little bit higher because the average rating for the 4 games in that was a little bit more. Moving on to the combined compilation rankings, which also factors in budget compilations, it's also in 7th place on that table. I suppose you could argue that this could have gone into the budget compilation league table, given that it was a compilation of budget games, but let's not forget it was released at full price in a big box. Ironically, if they'd taken Dizzy Panic out of the collection and marketed it a couple of years later as a Quattro compilation, I think I would have scored it even higher. Anyway, after suffering 2 pretty dire compilations in the previous 2 episodes of this series, it's nice to have a little bit of faith restored with this one, and to be honest, as I said, I wasn't really expecting it, because I'm not a huge fan of Dizzy. But what do you guys think about this compilation and the 5 games it contains? Please let me know in the video comments, and if you enjoyed the video, then please give it a like. That does it for this edition of the Commodore 64 Compilation Comparison. I'll be back with another compilation review in the near future, and plenty of other retro gaming content in the meantime. Thanks very much for watching this video, and until the next time, see ya!